Welcome to the mylifeinconcert.com podcast. I'm your host, Various Artists, and please join me as I travel back and revisit every live show I've seen from 1975 to the present. It's 8 a.m. We've had little sleep and don't really know where we are, except that we're many floors up in a locked room, and it sounds like they're taking a wrecking ball to our floor just to destroy us. I mean, first there was everything that went down last night where we easily could have been killed. And so what? Now they're trying to kill us again? This time by taking a wrecking ball to our room? Myself, MZ, and her new boyfriend, who I will call 2001, are all somewhere where we're not sure. We just know we're locked in a room many floors up in the sky, and the chain of events that led us here to this place of unknown location, we don't know where we are. They've been trying enough. But now, here we are in the very early morning, startled out of our much-needed sleep by that alarming noise, inexplicably, right outside one of the walls, the wall leading outside. What is that? We're living a nightmare. And after going through and surviving everything from last night, and now this. Why is this happening? What the hell is going on? Hey everybody, I'm your host, Various Artists, and this is the mylifeinconcert.com podcast. I invite you to jump into the time machine with me and returning special guest, Phil Robinson, and join us in looking back on this Toronto area show by goth godheads Siouxsie and the Banshees at the decidedly ungothy venue, namely Mississauga's International Centre, on a steaming hot and humid summer night. This is episode 34. It's concert number 26, and this episode is called Cities in Dust. Siouxsie and the Banshees with Images in Vogue, the International Centre, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, July 10th, 1984. And the ticket price was $13, which is $34.62 in 2024 Canadian dollars. So even by any standards, it was a deal. Greetings, dear listeners, both new and returning, and thanks for tuning in. So in this episode, I look back on a much anticipated live show when, after years of devoted fandom, I finally get to see the one and only Siouxsie Sioux and her plucky Banshees in a cavernous but wonderfully air-conditioned venue on Toronto's outskirts. Now, I've been following Miss Sioux since the early days of punk rock reporting in the UK press, where I read about her as part of this Bromley contingent, this group of early Sex Pistols fans who would follow them from gig to gig. And Billy Idol was also part of that social group. Now, Siouxsie and the Banshees, the group, made their major label debut much later than most of their peers in the class of 1976 and 77 British punk rock, with their debut 45, Hong Kong Garden, in the summer of 1978. It was a UK smash, hitting number 7 on the charts, and remains one of my favorite singles of the 70s. Now, they had been in a Chinese takeaway getting food when a bunch of right-wing skinheads burst into the restaurant and started attacking everyone there. And Siouxsie said it was terrifying. So this was, I guess, her tribute to her local Chinese takeout restaurant, which is where it all happened. Now, pretty much from the moment that single came out, I mean, I'd already been reading about her, found her this very interesting looking person. And when I finally got to hear her and hear that single, well, I was a nut from there on in. And when I finally got to see them in 1984, I was pretty damn stoked. However, This gig is another in what will be an ongoing subthread in the mylifeinconcert.com series that could be called Concert Disasters, with said disasters happening before, during, or after a show, or during all three for those extra lucky occasions. Frequently, they involve some of the cheap and old cars I was driving in the 80s malfunctioning in some way. And this is the first of those Car Nightmare EPs. For this episode, My Life in Concert regular special guest, Phil Robinson, is back again to share his memories of the show. Now, we went down with other people, which meant Phil was spared the journey that the other three of us went through. So he'll be coming up later to detail his recollections of the show and of the posy goth folks he attended the soiree with. So there's also a newly written blog entry for this show, released along with the podcast. Well, actually, I started and wrote a sizable chunk of it back in 2015 when I was still publishing on Open Salon. But when Open Salon closed early that year, which is where I first started blogging and where 98% of my readership read me at the time, I abandoned the piece and the blog. So 9 years later, I finished it. You can read the entry on the mylifeinconcert.com website, along with this podcast is there, but you're listening anyway. And as always, with the entry, there's ephemera, video links, etc. You know the drill. So, what the hell happened with this one? Stay tuned for leg casts, rumors of a gig, smoking fuses, the little Honda that couldn't, and cities in dust. But before I get to all that, I just want to quickly remind listeners to check out the mylifeinconcert.com website and blog chronicling this and many other shows between 1975 for now. I also have two related Spotify playlists to accompany this episode, and they're embedded into the website blog, and they are entitled MLIC Prompt, Siouxsie and the Banshees, Time Span C90, 1978 to 1995, and MLIC Prompt, Siouxsie and the Banshees, Cities in Dust, VA's Fave Tracks, 1977 to 2007. Now, the Time Span C90 compilation is my cassette-length sequenced overview of Siouxsie and the Banshees' career from 1978 to 1995, along with some Creatures as well. And the Creatures were a intermittent side project between Siouxsie and Budgie. Whereas Cities in Dust, VA's Fave Tracks, 1977 to 2007, is a 3-hour unsequenced compilation that includes more deep cuts, numbers from their 1977 Peel sessions, and also from Siouxsie's 2007 solo LP, Manta Ray. I used to know someone named Ken who was a Mant. So those are two playlists to complement the episode, and each are embedded into the blog entry online. So go dress up in black, look a bit ornery, smear your makeup around, put on the playlist, and have a gothing good time. And you can hear that in my other playlists under my various artist username on Spotify, or just it's easier just to search for mylifeinconcert.com or MLIC, followed by a prompt, as all my playlists start that way. And please like, follow, and subscribe on my Facebook and Instagram pages. I do a lot with Facebook. Instagram, I still keep wanting to get up to speed, but I got a lot on Facebook, as well as our YouTube channel, which features not only the podcasts, another place to hear them, but live footage from shows that Couplet and I have shot along the years, along with vintage video clips. And I'm planning on finally getting a whole new computer this year that's going to be state-of-the-art with a large video card, so I can finally start digitizing these tons of videos I have from the 80s and 90s. The equipment we have, it just doesn't cut it. So hopefully lots of older stuff will be coming later this year. And again, I'm thinking about TikTok, but we'll see. Not sure. And also to remember, hit that notification bell for new episodes. All right, that's over. Let's get back to the concert. So as you heard in the intro, this was not a concert adventure that went smoothly. Perhaps this trying horror show is somewhat fitting, given that this K2 of concert misadventures was our London-Toronto pilgrimage to see the icy goth queen herself, Siouxsie Sioux, and them their Banshees. So now, back to Siouxsie and the Banshees are one of those bands that sort of defined that 1978 to 84 corridor in my music life. 1984 was in many ways the end of an evolutional era for me that began with punk in the mid-70s. Now, I've been creating year-by-year playlists for myself on my Spotify page for each of those years of what I was listening to, mostly new but also old, new and old, all through those years, actually going back to 75. But all the ones where Siouxsie was recording 78 to 84, there's a lot of Siouxsie tracks on there. And also, too, you can really see how punk comes into the picture for me. I'd been following it for years, but really didn't hear it till 77. And just that chiasmic impact on my life and the various subgenre offshoots that started exploding out in all directions from that initial burst. So I'm going to have one up very soon for 1985. And again, that's kind of a year like 77. There's a real switch up in the year. So anyway, that's coming, and you'll see how things played out for me. So in terms of my being aware of Siouxsie, that goes back to 1976 and reading about her participation in the infamous, legendary 100 Club Punk Rock Festival in that other London in September of 1976, via coverage that it got in the UK music press. It was the 100 Club Punk Festival, that was the first real show of punks coalescing into a force to be reckoned with. And the event showcased as well as accelerated that nascent London punk scene and its clout, once again in September of 76. It was also the debut of Siouxsie and the Banshees. Now, prior to this, she had really become the face of what came to be called the Bromley Contingent, that group I mentioned earlier, a group of early Sex Pistols fans from the South London suburb of Bromley. And Phil will be talking about Bromley later. The Bromley Contingent went from gig to gig and helped to define early punk rock sartorial cues, templates, and temperaments. And this included the black dramatic makeup, wild hair, outrageous and distressed clothing, including clothes from Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood's Sex Shop. And Siouxsie developed a particularly unique and confrontational look all of her own that, of course, has been copied a million times over, but came really from her own imagination. These days, everyone wears distressed everything with multicolor hair. I've seen suburban grandmoms in their 70s with pink and blue hair at the mall and the grocery store, which is great. But punk did it all first. The Banshees, they initially formed almost as a lark to open the 100 Club Punk Festival in the UK capital, with this ad hoc first lineup featuring Siouxsie on vocals, along with her Bromley Contingent pal, Steve Severin on bass, plus future Sex Pistols Sid Vicious on drums, and future Adam and the Ants guitarist Marco Perrone on guitar. And what they did is delivered a improvised 20-minute version of the Lord's Prayer. That was their set. Now, while their creation was unrehearsed, done more as an experiment, the attendant coverage their performance received from the festival meant that they had, name recognition in the press overnight. And with that, Siouxsie and the Banshees were born into a genuine entity. And of course, she also came into UK consciousness through being part of the notorious Bill Grundy interview with the Sex Pistols on December 1st, 1976, where, they swore and it was live. And she was hanging out in the background and sort of making fun of him because, they all were, because he was really drunk. But anyway, I have the link to that interview up on the blog. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. It never gets tired. So Vicious and Peroni, they dropped out pretty quickly with drummer Kenny Morris and guitarist John McKay, and that kind of was the band that everyone came to know in the early days. Now, from the beginning, the band wanted to step outside of the standard 4/4 early punk sound of the day. And because of those early press mentions, they easily landed gigs and began rehearsing themselves into the shape of a real group. But, whereas most of their early scene contemporaries landed contracts and issued their debut 45s and EPs starting in late 76 through early 77 or throughout 77, the Banshees kept a lower profile, developing a radical new sound out of the limelight, refusing to compromise. When they did essentially sign with Polydor UK in 1978, it was clear they played their hand well by delaying their recording career as they emerged with a completely unique sound and approach. Their classic debut single, which I was talking about, the obscenely catchy Hong Kong Garden, zoomed up into the UK top 10, cascading on a revolutionary new guitar sound, combining a raw punk edge, but with a chiming, angular approach that set it apart. However, Hong Kong Garden was only the accessible tip of the iceberg. They released their debut album, The Scream, in November of 1978. And I heard one of the first import copies when it arrived here in London in early 79. And oh boy, oh my, what a shock. Hearing that album is one of those rare listening experiences where there's a before and an after, because this was music I'd never heard before, because it hadn't existed before, and altered my concept of what music could be and how it could sound. Now, because Hong Kong Garden had been so catchy and immediate, it really hits you. I was expecting more of the same for the album. Not even close. It was almost like a different band. Instead, the album was dark, foreboding, angular, alien, but also fascinating. And there was both space and tension in the music, beauty and alarm. And again, this is the punk era where, it was fast and loud and everything, the sound was filled. And one of the things that hits you with this album on a number of the tracks is the space. And the space sometimes is important as the music being played. So the album was put on, and it starts with that track, Pure, that starts with that single deep bass note that just rattled out of the speakers. A deep bass note repeating, followed by, again, lots of space, with the slow song slowly unfolding at this very, very deliberate pace, with Siouxsie sort of wailing away wordlessly in the background. So, this 2-minute opener came to an end, and I thought, okay. And next up was Jigsaw Feeling, which again sort of like slowly, the sound slowly opens up in the track. And you've got this dark, insistent song with this, new angular, arty style of guitar playing. Now, it had punk's energy and brashness, but this wasn't punk. It was strange, dramatic. It was very unsettling. It was something else altogether. Again, this was totally new music. Then the pace slowed again for Overground. Nothing was obvious or expected about the tune. Again, it unfolded slowly and it built piece by piece. Now, next up was Carcass, which is probably the closest thing to Hong Kong Garden. So that one I related to more off the bat. It was kind of like, believe that was one of their earlier numbers. So it was a little more in a kind of a traditional punk vein. But then finally, the side ended with that chilling, deconstructed cover of the Beatles' Helter Skelter, translating very much a Death Valley 69 vibe of darkness. It was hard for me to wrap my head around this gallows cover. It was genuinely unnerving. And that was just side one. Now, while side two kicked off with another pretty accessible track, Mirage, the rest of the side veered back into this singular, malevolent-sounding sonic world. And as Switch concluded the album, I was pretty much speechless and processing. I was like, what was that? I didn't have the language to describe this music because I had yet to hear the term post-punk, which was essentially invented in 1978, and this being one of three, along with Magazine's debut and PIL's first album, which came out around the same time as The Scream, but I think The Scream is better than all of them. For those hearing the album now for the first time, The Scream's intense impact could be diluted for newer listeners, as its sound, especially John Mackay's guitar playing, has been so widely copied and then copies made of copies. U2's The Edge instantly comes to mind as someone who is frequently acknowledged. The Banshee sound and Mackay's guitar playing as an influence on his own. And it's very evident, especially on those early U2 albums. And also The Scream was produced by Steve Lillywhite, who went on to become a star producer in the 80s and produced those early U2 albums. Plus he did Peter Gabriel's third album with The Melting Face. That's my favorite. He did several key XTC albums, Joan Armatrading, Simple Minds, Psychedelic Furs, and on and on and on. And it's with The Scream and Hong Kong Garden. Those were his first hit projects, and that's what launched his career. And he certainly brought out some of those experiences from working with Siouxsie to working with U2. Indeed, the level of acclaim that The Scream received in the UK for its sonic and musical innovation, made Lillywhite a production name to be reckoned with overnight. I also have to throw in, he did Johnny Thunder's So Alone, that sort of Junkies holiday album around that time. I love that album. That's one I still play all the time. So needed to throw that in there for a moment. And actually, Johnny Thunders, an episode with Johnny Thunders, Sylvain and the reunited New York Dolls is coming up in a few episodes. Anyway, back to The Scream. So because so many things about the sound and playing on The Scream have been picked up and recycled, it may be difficult for the modern listener to really appreciate what a shock and how visionary and innovative the album was. So how about do this? Go off and spend a few hours listening to, a series of punk and new wave albums from late 77 through late 78 that were sort of popular favorites in that community at the time. There's a bunch, like Nevermind the Bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols, The Clash's Give 'Em Enough Rope, The Jam's All Mod Cons, Ramones' Road to Ruin, the Buzzcocks' Love Bites, Blondie's Parallel Lines, Elvis Costello and the Attractions' This Year's Model, Can't Stand the Rosillos, the Boomtown Rats, A Tonic for the Troops, That's Life by Sham 69, even Wire's Pink Flag, which, along with television's Marquee Moon and Iggy Pop's The Idiot, they're sort of proto-post-punk. So go and listen to a whole bunch of those albums in a row, then put on The Scream. You will immediately hear how different and jarring it is from any of those other albums. It's in a genre field of its own. And in terms of like the commercial music on the charts in Britain and all of the, a lot of the slop that was in the North American charts at the time, it's another universe. It's so far divorced from any of that. And even if you listen to the odder and artier acts of the time, XTC, Talking Heads, Devo, Wire's second album, Chairs Missing, none of them really sound and especially feel anything like the music on The Scream. Little did I know this strange, discordant, arty, and expressive music would soon come to dominate my tastes as the 70s ended and the first few years of the 80s began. But again, it took a few listens for me to really absorb the album. I didn't get it right away. And it was kind of like every time a few more tracks would reveal themselves. But I have this thing, and I learned this years ago, is that if I put something on and it's like, I don't know if I like this or not, but I have this feeling that I want to hear it again, I go for it, because what it means is that I'm hearing something interesting and my ears aren't quite there yet, but that's coming. And that whole thing during the post-punk period, I love all kinds of music from all sorts of, especially from like the last 100 years. Pretty much I listened to stuff all through that period. But I think, and I hate going to this period is extra special. I have lots of periods that are extra special for music. But I think that was one of the most innovative, where it was a thing where you'd hear, like with post-punk, you'd hear this really kind of experimental record and you'd go, it was sometimes hard to wrap your head around it at first. And then within a few listens, it sounded like so au courant, and everything else you were listening to sounded tired. And then about 5 months later, it would happen again. I mean, these days, any kind of new innovation is extraordinary, because everything seems, not everything, there are some great stuff, but not on the level then. It just seems there's a lot more homogeneity, you would say. So the Banshees, you know, they did so much great stuff in the years ahead, but the Scream remains my favorite. However, after that sort of astonishing, auspicious start, they did kind of momentarily stumble. 1979's The Staircase, Mystery, and Playground Twist, they're okay, but nothing really, you know, amazing or super catchy. And the Weak Joint Hands album was a classic case of sophomore slump. That's easily my least favorite of those first, say, 5 albums. And then Jones and Kenny, they bailed on the band after the tour had started, and it could have spelled the end of the band, but instead it triggered a rebirth and move forward. Now, the opening act on that UK tour was this new group that had just released their debut, Three Imaginary Boys, a band called The Cure. Now, when they left, The Cure's guitarist, Robert Smith, stepped in and basically played all the Banshees material and his set with The Cure. And those two bands, because of that, were intertwined for many years. By 1980, Magazine's impressionistic guitarist John McGow had jumped ship and was now one of the Banshees, and also drummer Budgie was on board. And of course, he'd had his stint with the Slits and was soon to be Susie's partner for many years. That Slits, it's interesting because out of that whole wave of sort of the bands from the early punk era, I think Siouxsie, the Scream, and also the Slits cut, maybe even more so. I think Cut was about 20 years ahead of its time. I bought it when it came out and it was like, oh wow, but it was me and one other person. I think no one liked it. So again, one of those albums, it's acclaimed now, but not many people felt that way when it came out. So with this lineup, they kind of went into their second golden period, and they had all these amazing British hits and songs. Christine, Israel, Happy House, Spellbound, Melt, Arabian Nights, and did 3 amazing albums. First off, Kaleidoscope, which is very aptly named because they do songs in many different styles, and that was also their trying out a new guitarist album. So there's a bunch on there. Steve Jones from the Pistols plays on a few tracks. Then there was 1981's Juju, which musically and topically it's widely seen as the goth apotheosis. And then there's the lush, glorious noir psychedelia of A Kiss in the Dream House. Now, for me, that's my second favorite Banshees album. Unfortunately, following McGow's unfortunate dismissal from the group for acute alcoholism in 1983, Robert Smith temporarily rejoined the gang, again, doing double duty in the Banshees and The Cure, as he had done in 1979. And of course, they had a big hit with him on board in late 83, that cover of the Beatles' Dear Prudence. After 1984, at the time, I found I wasn't connecting with the albums as much. And later in the interview, which I did with Phil some time back, I say, well, you know, after Hyena, you know, none of the albums are really that great. Okay, since then and compiling the Spotify playlists, I went back and re-listened to all those later albums, and I gotta say, I really like them now, especially Peep Show, especially, but also Superstition and the John Cale produced The Rapture. So I've changed my opinion, and this contradicts what I say later. I still feel the early years are their best stuff, but those late albums are far better than I had thought. Also, too, Susie's Manta Ray album from 2007. So I've been having a late in the game enjoyment of late in the game Banshees albums. But that's what's so great about music. Even if you don't get everything when it's happening in the first time round, you know, it's just like the province of Ontario. It's yours to discover. So by the time I finally got to see them, after 6 years of devoted fandom from yours various, they were touring the Smith inclusive Hyena album, with Mr. Goth of the Teased Hair Persuasion having decamped 2 months before the gig. So Smith was out of the band, and they brought in John Valentine Carruthers, and I'm blanking. Was he from Clock DVA? He's from another one of the bands. Anyway, they brought him in, but, you know, I was flippin' excited to be seeing this lot. So at this point in my life, I mean, high school was over. I dropped out of college. I knew I wanted to continue with a post-secondary education. I wanted to go to university. But I didn't want to head back down that road until I was clear on what I wanted to do. So ergo, my early 20s and the mid 80s found me bouncing around a few jobs when I could even find one during this recession-plagued time. And at this point, I'd scored a low-paying but fun writing gig, writing for a community newspaper. So I arranged to leave work early. We're going to drive to Toronto, which is just 2 hours from London, actually Mississauga, which is kind of one of the suburbs of Toronto in the south end, so easy, a little bit closer. And I stopped by to pick up Co-Celebrants MZ in 2001 in my late 70s silver Honda Accord that I bought off my sister. So anyway, now we're going to switch over to the interview with Phil, and you'll find out what happened with that lovely Honda. So anyway, let's go to the interview. Let's roll it. So once again, I'm joined by Phil Robinson, my special guest, back to the podcast as we look back on this show, this Siouxsie and the Banshees show from 1984. Now, we were both there, but we went separately. But we'll talk about that in a moment. I'd like to start with asking you, so do you remember when you first heard about Siouxsie or Siouxsie and the Banshees? Do you recall sort of your becoming aware of them?
Probably from reading the NME, but I hadn't heard them. I think the first thing I remember hearing of them, the first song I remember hearing of them is Christine, because my sister's called Christine. So of course it was like, oh, this is cool. I think that was the first thing I remember hearing of them.
Mm-hmm. Good song to start with as well. That's one of my favorite Banshees numbers. Yeah. And so you heard that. So in terms of, okay, so that would have been around 1980, 81. Yeah. So in terms of, did you start listening to them more? Did you what was kind of your genesis of, you know, being a fan and listening to them and that sort of thing?
I can't really remember. I remember that hearing that song and then sort of picking up, and I think I've picked up an album from somewhere and just sort of took it from there. So it's just like, yeah, that it was just hearing that song that sort of kicked it off. It just wasn't, you know, that was it really.
And that kind of, there was that whole, I mean, that tune as well, that and Happy House, because they started with The Scream, but that, which I talked about earlier in the podcast, but that kind of period where they had, you know, John McGowan on guitar, and they kind of had that series of albums and singles, you know, in the early 80s, a real golden period. In terms of this show, do you remember hearing about it? Any of the sort of pre-show build-up, hearing about it, tickets, anything like that? Did anything come to mind?
I don't remember when I first heard about it. I remember I, I, the people. I'm just trying to remember the people I went with because I can't remember their names.
Oh wow.
It was some. I know it was some people that I knew from. There was that Monday night at where was that?
Notes.
Nat Notes. Yeah,
Notes, yeah.
some people I knew from there who were a bit sort of ultra trendy kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a bit kind of. And you'll have to excuse me if they are listening. They seem that looking back, they were probably a little bit pretentious because it kind of that night attracted that kind of crowd sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can't remember. I think one of them was called Steve. Um, and one of those guys got I remember he got the tickets for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and then we went down in somebody's car, and then on the day itself. You want to talk about the day?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I remember on the day itself, we drove to Toronto. We went to somebody. One of them knew somebody who lived in Toronto who we were picking up. So we went to Toronto, went to this person's house who had no idea who they were, and then we went to somewhere in Toronto to get some to eat at some small Italian restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to the gig.
Okay.
And I think that's where we met up in the lineup, I think, in the queue to get in.
You and I.
Yeah, because we were at we were in the hall
Mm-hmm.
together. But I remember it was almost like an airplane hangar or something, wasn't it? It was like a weird place. Where was it?
Yes. It was at the International Center in Mississauga, which was the
Right.
most unSusie place
Yeah.
to see them because
Was
it
it
was basically this anonymous convention center on the outskirts of Toronto.
was it near the airport? Near Toronto
Yeah,
Airport?
possibly. It's in Mississauga, and I've actually got a picture that I'm going
All
to
right,
put up
okay.
of the blog of the place. And again, it's a convention center. It's a big anonymous concrete convention center. So it was a really weird place for
Yeah.
them to be playing.
I remember as well, though, there was a sign for another concert which was happening, I think, a couple of weeks later, which I didn't know about, but I can still remember it. It was Echo and the Bunnymen and New Order together.
Wow. Okay, wow. I know. I don't recall. I don't recall the sign or hearing about that, but that would have been an
Yeah,
amazing show.
yeah.
And
Just
of course, that
one.
was the right crowd to advertise to.
I know. Yeah, it was a big sign.
You're mentioning us meeting in line. I can't actually remember that part, but I remember the lineup. And I
Uh,
remember there's a long lineup to get in. I don't know if they started the gig late or whatever, but I do remember being in line. We were in line and we were talking to this couple who were there. And it's weird the things you remember. And they were talking about, we got talking about, because that band X at that point had put out that cover of Wild Thing.
oh yeah.
Uh, and I remember talking about that and thinking, oh, it was okay. And they're saying, well, when you hear it in the club and the club is packed, it's great. It's weird, the stuff you recall. Um, but we had, no, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, no, I was just going to say I remember the people in the line as well. That there was lots of Susie wannabes and Robert Smith wannabes. And I remember the people, a lot of people were thinking that Robert Smith was going to be there because he was on that album that they were touring with. So there was like, oh, do you think he's going to be there? Do you think he's going to be there? And I
Right.
remember thinking, I don't think he will, but it'd be great if he is.
Right. I'd forgotten about that. Right. Because John McGow, they'd had to fire John McGow, and Robert Smith stepped back in and rejoined the Banshees for that one album, Hyena. Hyena. And that's right. Yeah, we're thinking, will Robert Smith be there? Will Robert Smith? And he wasn't. Because that's also, I think The Cure had just come out with The Top around that
Mm.
time. And that's one of my favorite Cure albums. So, but unfortunately
Yeah.
he was not there. Now, our trip there, do you recall what happened to us on our trip there? Because
No.
okay, well, we had momentous, not so much the trip there, though that was a problem, but the trip back. So I went with MZ in 2001, as I'm calling him. And we went down in my car. Now, what I was driving at that point was a Honda Accord. And my sister had bought it brand new in 1977 when, you know, the new Honda dealership was here. And she sold it. She drove it for many years and then sold it to me, I think around 1983, 84. And I went and picked the two of them up. And I remember us driving down Dundas Street, heading east on, you know, to get on our way out of the town. I also remember we had also created the Marcel Want a Cigarette track with the backing track from White Lines. And I have this memory of us driving down Dundas Street on this like really hot summer day. So of course there was no air conditioning in the car, and us having the windows open and blasting that out the windows. So it was a fun day and we were all in really high spirits. And I remember going down Dundas, pulling up to Dundas and pulling up to Wellington. So we're going down Dundas and we stop pulling up to the lights at Dundas and Wellington. Mm-hmm. And just as we're ready to go, steam and smoke starts billowing out of the hood of the car.
I was just about to say, didn't your car break down on the way there?
And it's like, oh no, like we're ready to go. And so we had to go out to the Honda dealership in the East End. We were heading that way anyway. And they were really, really nice because my dad had worked there and he knew some of the people and they therefore knew me. And we went in and the three of us just kind of sat around. They were really good. They got it in right away and they spent about an hour looking at it, trying to figure what the problem was. And they came out and they said, well, we did, you know, this look over of stuff. We don't know what went wrong. We would need it for longer. We'd have to do a more in-depth examination of what the problem was. And they said, but you know, if you want to drive it and take it there, like something's blown. We don't know what it is. We need more time. But if you go to use whatever it is that's blown, you'll find out. And so we thought, oh, okay. So we got back in the car. And after that, from there to the drive to the International Center, things were fine. Things were fine. There was no problem. And we thought, okay, well, we're home free. And we got there and we're standing in line and we must have seen you in line. And then eventually we went in. Now, there's something very, very specific and important that I remember about the International Center when we went in. Do you have any memories of the International Center or anything special about it?
Not that I can think of. I just remembered it being a bit cavernous.
Yes.
Yeah, no, nothing. If you can obviously remember something, I might bring back memories. So go on.
Oh yeah, this show was okay. Like so, the year before we went to Police Picnic '83, and that was a first because it was the first concert I went to that had jumbotrons. And it's like, oh my God, you know, now you can see what's happening on the stage. Well, this next year, and this Siouxsie and the Banshees show was another first. And I'll just say two words, air conditioning. Right. Air conditioning. I think it was the first indoor gig I'd ever been to that had air conditioning. And I remember because it was a hot, really hot, steamy, stinking hot day. And I remember thinking, okay, I kind of sometimes really like, you know, the packed, hot, sweaty clubs, but I was also thinking, kind of like this. It's nice and comfortable. It's not very sort of goth and rock and roll, but, ooh, I'm comfy.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, that was I've always remembered that, my first air-conditioned show. But it was again such a weird place because it was like this sterile suburban conference center. But
Yeah, I do remember it from what I can remember it felt like it were in the middle of nowhere
we were. It was like suburban Mississauga.
because it must have been when I was with them people. God, I wish I can remember what they were called. Um, we on the way there, it must have been on the way there because it couldn't have been on the way back. We stopped off at a calf, which was at why I think it was that why I was saying was it near the airport because we stopped off at this little sort of calf that was right at the end of the airport runway.
Mm,
So you could sit there watching the planes coming in and out, but like right over your head.
yeah, I think it would make sense. That's
So
interesting.
that's why I was thinking, oh, I wonder if it was there because we stopped off on the way there
Yeah,
to watch planes, I guess.
yeah. Okay, yeah, and that makes sense. See, because we'll talk about the ride home after. Our disaster was after the concert. You were having a nice cup of coffee watching planes while you'll hear what we went through while you were relaxing and having such a nice time. So on to the gig itself. Now, the opening band was Images in Vogue. Do you remember them?
I do, yes. I was gonna ask you because I couldn't remember the name of who opened. I remember it was a Canadian band from Toronto. But yeah, Images in Vogue, yeah, I do remember them.
Yeah. And I can't remember a lot of details from the set, but I liked them at the time. I should go back and hear the tunes. And I thought they were good. Like it wasn't, yeah. Like I didn't.
Yeah, I thought they fit.
Yeah.
They fit the crowd, you know.
Yeah, it was a good choice for an opener because they kind of had like new wavy and maybe a bit gothy and
that
so
Toronto look.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was them, and then Siouxsie and the Banshees came on. Now, I remember something very specific about Siouxsie on that night. Do you recall anything particular of note about Susan and her Banshees? Being formal, Susan and the Banshees.
Yeah, her Sunday name. I can remember her not being very happy with the crowd.
She was in a snit.
Yeah, she wasn't very happy. I remember I remember somebody trying to get onto the stage.
Oh, okay.
And she had a microphone in her hand and she had it put it up in the fist about to hit, like threatened to hit him if he got onto the stage. She was like that, about to, and she would doing that, but she would like, I mean, was she dancing around?
No, she wasn't, because that's the thing I remember. I think it was the Albert Hall, but I think it was at the Albert Hall. She had just fallen off the stage at the Albert Hall. If it wasn't the Albert Hall, it was somewhere else. But she had played a gig in the UK and fell off the stage and broke her leg. So for this show, she was in a leg cast.
Well, that's really weird because I can remember watching it after I'd moved back over here. I remember seeing them on TV here, and she had her leg in a cast on on TV. So that doesn't sort of line up to
the time
unless
frame.
It was a pre-recorded performance that they showed, because wouldn't have lined up because I didn't move here till the end of October 85.
85, yeah. No, that's what it probably was. It was probably a pre-recorded program because she was in a cast.
Yeah, and in a foul mood. But I think she was in a foul mood because the crowd were quite lackluster.
Real? Because I can't. Okay, can you talk about that?
I remember us jumping up and down and screaming and singing along and going mad because it was Siouxsie and the Banshees. But I remember her saying at the end, somebody told me there was a gig here tonight. I guess they were wrong, and threw the microphone on the stage and trundled off.
Yeah, she was just. See, I that's interesting because I can't. Like, I remember that. I remember you've mentioned that a few times as like rumor of a gig or something like that, and vaguely remember that. And at the end, but I remember I enjoyed the show. The songs were good. They did a lot of songs I wanted to hear, but it wasn't quite like the great show I was expecting.
I can't remember. I remember I really liked it, but I was really hyped up to see them, and I think that, it didn't really bother me. I think at the time, my expectations for, you know, to see people, especially people like that, they could have just stood there most of the time, and I would have been, I would have thought they were great. So I loved it from what I can remember, but I don't, I don't. Those are what the main things I can remember. I remember the crowd just kind of stood there,
Mm.
trying. They were all a lot of people just trying too hard to be cool.
Ah, okay. Gotcha.
That's the impression I was getting from a lot. Mainly all those people trying to look like her and Robert Smith.
Hmm. Which, of course, you want that at a Siouxsie gig as well,
Well,
and you
yeah,
expect it.
yeah. But you also want people to jump up and down.
Yeah, yeah, and I also felt, I guess for me, one of my memories is like she was kind of not in a great mood, but I also put some of that down to the fact that she had to perform in a leg cast, so it really limited her mobility.
Yeah, I
The
suppose so. Yeah, I guess she would be a bit peeved off if you were. Maybe she could have been forced into doing it. She's probably thinking, I'm not doing it, but then they
well,
probably contracts and all that kind of stuff, and you better go out and do it or else.
yeah, because I think I remember reading in NME or something like that. I got one just before because they'd come in a few weeks later. And I read about it and I thought, oh, is the show even going to go on? That's right. We contacted someone or the International Center because we were wondering, is the show going to go ahead? And it was. So it could have been a thing that she was already in a not great mood because, she was performing in a cast. And then she gets there and the audience are all, I'm too cool to even move my foot,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And it probably was, all of that together. And I enjoyed the show. I'm doing this series where I'm picking my favorite show of every year, but 84 and 85 weren't the best years. So I did enjoy it, but I remember thinking I liked it, but it wasn't quite as good as I was expecting. And
Hmm.
one thing I do remember her doing, because she couldn't move much, is she was doing this thing where like she'd put her hand, hang on, I'll do it with the camera here, she'll put her arm out, sort of doing this fluttering sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
thing. But
I remember doing that.
yeah, I can't remember a lot of, I think, I don't know if I'm imagining this or not, but my feeling is that they came out on stage to Dazzle, which was the opening cut on the album and one of the singles, and and Dazzle opens with that sort of orchestral fanfare or
Mm.
orchestral opening.
Mhm.
I seem to have, I don't know if this is a real or an imagined memory, but I kind of have one of them coming out with like, the string section playing and then they went into Dazzle, but I could be wrong.
And you're probably right. I can't remember that. So
Yeah, this is one of those shows where I don't have a lot of details and I can't remember a lot of songs that were played other than she and the band did pretty much what I was hoping to hear. I
yeah,
remember that.
I remember. Yeah, I do remember them doing Christine, and I remembered them doing. They did Dear Prudence because
Right.
that was out at the time, wasn't it? So,
Yeah, that was
uh,
like their big hit from the previous fall.
mm,
Yeah. I still have my 45 of that.
yeah, very good.
It's got a really neat gate. It's got this really cool 3-panel sleeve that opens up and then and then a sleeve within a sleeve and then inside the pocket where the record sits, there's even graphics inside. So man, they used to make some great especially in Britain, like punk and post-punk and that. You'd buy
Mm,
these singles, but they were like little pieces of art half the time as
yeah,
well.
yeah. You didn't get a lot of singles in Canada at the time that I can remember anyway. That they even had a picture sleeve.
Right. Right.
That was a new thing. That's why I used to like getting the imports because
Yeah.
most of the time they all had a picture sleeve, and it was like, ooh,
Yeah, you had so
what
the
to look at.
music and then you had a visual element
Yeah,
that went
yeah.
with it. Yeah. So yeah, she should have done Dear Prudence, and of course they probably would have done a number of songs off of Hyena as well. But I remember the set list being good. I remember again really liking rather than loving the show, but I think she was in a bit of a mood.
I wonder if you can get it. You can get set lists online.
Right. Actually, look that up because I was going to look that up. I'm trying to add them to the blog entries now. And, this is Siouxsie that we're going to see. So, I'm not expecting, would you like a cup of tea and a biscuit? I'm not necessarily expecting that, but it was more grumpy than gothy, Siouxsie.
Average set list of the year 1984.
Oh.
That's what they've got.
Okay, so what's on the average set list?
So
what are some of the
Dazzle
songs?
to start with?
Aha, okay, there we go.
Dazzle, Cascade, Running Town, We Hunger, Melt, Into the Light, Pointing Bone, Red Over White, Dear Prudence, Christine, Red Light, Switch, Bring Me the Head of the Preacher Man, Arabian Nights, Painted Bird, Spellbound, and Monitor.
Wow, so there's really nothing from the Banshees Mach 1, sort of like up until 79. It's all 1980 and after. And unsurprisingly, there's a lot there from Hyena, which you would expect.
Yeah. So, but there's other ones as well. It's just show closes and show. Yeah, so I think that's probably correct then, I would have thought.
Yeah.
But there's thing underneath says main set closers, and they've got Spellbound, Israel, T-Rex cover of the 20th Century Boy, Halloween, Jigsaw Feeling, Poppy Day, Helter Skelter. But I don't remember.
Okay, well that goes back to the first album, that cover of Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
I really can't remember what closed the show. I had that kernel of memory about Dazzle opening it, but not the closer.
But at least you got that one right.
Yes. Okay. That's my one. That's the only tune I can really remember. And even then I wasn't sure.
Well, I remember I'm glad my memory served me right with the Dear Prudence and Christine,
Yeah. Yeah. And those are two absolute tunes you would expect, to have played at the time. All right. So we went to the show. You loved the show. I really liked the show. It was a fun show to see, even if the crowd was sort of, I'm too cool for school. Yeah. And Siouxsie was a little bit grumpykins. What about, so do you remember anything after the show other than going, for a coffee and watching airplanes? That's what Dusty Springfield used to do. She'd go to airports and watch the planes take off.
No, I don't think so. I can't. Nothing stands out.
Unfortunately, a lot stands out for me. Okay. So we get out of that beautifully air-conditioned International Center, and I remember it was just like a really hot, humid, sticky, icky evening. One of those like super hot summer nights, but also very, very humid as well. So, yay, we got here. Yay, saw Siouxsie. Yay. Now it's time to go back home because I had to work in the morning. Because remember, I was working at the Herald, that community paper.
Oh, yes.
And I had to be back at work the next morning. And it was like I would have had my eyeballs on my cheeks, but I had to, be back there. Mind you, when you're younger, like what, I was 21, you're just much more resilient. Now I need my full 8 hours every night. Back then I could go on a few.
Yeah.
And so we got into the car, and again, it's this kind of sticky night. We get in, we start to, everyone's trying to get out of the parking lot. We get out of the parking lot and we start, of course, we're driving on the 401. Now, for those listeners who are not from the southwestern Ontario area, which is a big chunk of my listeners because people are listening from all over the world. There's something, before I tell you what happened, there's something you need to know about the 401. And this is from, actually, I got this from Wikipedia a few years back when I initially tried to write the blog entry in 2015 before Open Salon closed. So this is from Wikipedia from a few years back. Quote, "The part of Highway 401 that passes through Toronto is the busiest highway in the world and one of the widest. Together with Quebec Auto Route 20, it forms the road transportation backbone of the Quebec City-Windsor corridor, along which over half of Canada's population resides." So, in other words, the 401 is pretty much a 24/7 onslaught of ceaseless traffic without a lot of pullover options at key points, especially in and around the GTA. So it's just something this it's even 10 times more today, but it's something even at night, it's always busy. Now, because the other thing too is because of this heat and the steaminess, there was a fog. So where there was this thick, dense fog. And I think it kind of hit us more once we got out of the parking lot. And I remember it was pretty close to the 401. So you pretty much just pulled out and you're on the 401, which makes sense for a convention center because you want that kind of setup. And so we started driving just a little bit, and then rain started to fall. It started to trickle and little raindrops. So we're driving in the fog. You can't see much in front of you. And these raindrops start to trickle. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I've got to put the windshield wipers on. That's when we found out what the problem was. The fuse or the mechanism that made the windshield wipers work had died and burnt out. That's what was, whatever it is, that's right. What it was. So the windshield wipers weren't working, and I couldn't see anything because it quickly started to rain. We couldn't clear it off, and we're driving in a deep fog. We're like, oh no, oh no, this is so not good at all. And we were like, oh shit, like, and it's not just like, here, let's pull over here. Like there's barricades and stuff like that. And so we were immediately like, oh shit. And we were like, what? Like, we just have to keep going. I'm driving the car. I'm driving 2001 is sitting next to me in the passenger seat, and MZ was in the back. And freaking out and screaming and yelling, if you go fast at all, I'm going to start screaming. Well, you are already. And so kind of need that when we're trying to stay calm. So what we had to quickly do was I threw on my hazard lights, but again, we're driving in deep fog. So people aren't going to see those hazards until they're close to us. And we thought, if we make it out of this, we're lucky. It was just bad. So what happened was I slowed down, and 2001 was literally hanging out the window on the side of the car. And it would be like, okay, so start turning a little to the left, a little to the left, a little straight. Okay, now we're going around a corner, right. And I kind of didn't know where I was driving. And again, you'd see these lights suddenly come up behind you, and then, their brake lights would go on. So people kept coming up behind us and almost hitting us. And it was terrifying. But, at least the two of us in the front, we were remaining calm and focused, and we made a good team. We got through this, and we drove. We thought the very first place we can pull over, we're pulling over. And we did this for a while, and we got into the turning lane. So, we were in the right lane, not rather in the middle or the far lane. And it was probably, not that far from the venue, but because we were driving so slowly, and also because when stuff like this is happening, time slows down. So we were probably driving for, I don't know, like 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. And there's this, off ramp And again, because it was like, thick pea soup fog, we couldn't see anything. We just pulled off, and we thought we'll pull off and get to somewhere where we can pull to the side of the road. And our luck was then with us, because when we pulled off and we went around the corner, there was a hotel there. And we're like, oh my God. Okay, because we can't go anywhere. And so we pulled in to this hotel, pulled up to the front, and we went inside, because we kind of pooled our money, like, how much money? We just need to get a room. And we pooled our money together, went to the front desk. And at this point, it's probably about midnight. And, the woman at the front desk was really nice. She was really, really helpful. She understood the predicament we were in. But I remember we were a bit short of being able to get one room. And then one of us, maybe MZ, was through some involvement with something, could get a discount. And that discount was just enough that we could afford it and maybe have like about $15-20, left over. Because, of course, this is before the days. I mean, they had the swipe cards here in London, like, the debit cards here in London, but they weren't widely used at that time. And so we got into this room, and I think there was like a vending machine, and got like, nuts or something like that, and a soft drink, and just, it was really terrifying. It was really, really intense. So, I mean, and then we almost weren't able to get into the hotel. And I remember, so we got up there, and we just needed time to decompress. So they slept in one bed, I slept in another. And I think it was probably like 1:30 or 2 before we got to sleep. And then the next morning at about 8 a.m., there was this boom and we were several stories up, and it sounded like a crane was trying to demolish the building outside, like our 7th or 8th story window. And so MZ started screaming, like, both from what is it, but also, I've had enough. Jesus, like, enough. And we thought, what the hell is going on? And we went to the window, and they were doing some work on another part of the building, and they were like, with jackhammers or something at 8 a.m. God. 8 a.m. And so we went, I think they even had like a continental breakfast or something that came with it. So we had that. Now, luckily, it was beautiful, clear, sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. So we're like, okay, let's cross all our fingers that we don't need, that we don't need, there's no rain.
Yeah.
And I think from the front desk, they allowed us, first off, to make phone calls, of course, years before cell phones, and, let our loved ones at home know, where we were. And also I had to phone my work and say, I'm in Toronto, and we have car problems, and I'm not coming in today. And also the Honda shop, because we're like, okay, remember us? We were here yesterday. Well, we found out what happened, and can I take the car in when we arrive back? And so we drove home. We were very lucky. I mean, if it had been like rainy or anything, but we made it back. We went right to the Honda dealership, and they fixed the problem. But and this was really, I think, one of the first, because I was driving, because I'd bought this car from my sister, and so it was getting a bit older. But I was driving a lot of bad cars, in the 80s and even early 90s. And this is the first of many entries that will be coming up in this series that could be called Car Disaster Problems.
You could look at quite a few of your disasters that you've had when we've looked back at different gigs you've had. You had a problem with when you went to Heatwave, Police Picnic, this one.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was something else.
Yeah, shit goes on at these
somebody was
gigs.
trying to tell you something, not to go to Toronto for concerts.
Well, I mean, most of the time it's okay. And then, I mean, later in the decade, I mean, I would go to Toronto for shows, but I mean, especially later in the decade in the 90s, I was in Toronto all the time for shows. But yeah, there was a lot of really bad things went on. But this, I think, was the first one that was car related, and it is not the last, you know. So, oh, what an ordeal.
Yeah, you can laugh about it now.
Oh yeah, well, they say comedy is tragedy plus time, right? So yeah, so it was funny now, really not funny, especially when you'd have these cars, you'd see the lights just almost like they were going to smash right into your car and then they'd stop.
Yeah.
And that happened over and over and over because, of course, it's just constant traffic on the 401, even at that time of the morning, you know?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Holy doodles.
I don't remember anything like that happening to us. I don't even remember the journey back. I don't know.
I guess I'm just lucky. There's a Bob Dylan show coming up way down the line. Oh my God, at the CNE. And again, another car problem. And there's a few of them that got stranded in Toronto that night. And anyway, actually, that Dylan show, we left early. We wanted to get there early. I think we left at 2, and we got there because Timbuk 3 were opening. We got there just as they walked on stage. So it took us like about 6 hours to get to Toronto because we had to keep stopping. We stopped in a few shops. It was just, and then that's right. The car died in Etobicoke, right in front of a mechanic shop. And then we had to take, I can't bus how we got from Etobicoke to the CNE, but anyway, that's all coming up. My God. So anyway, my question is, okay, so did you ever see Siouxsie again?
No, I've never had a chance to go see her again, at all.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Bromley when we lived in London.
Oh, yes.
So we got a bus and we went because we took a little while on the bus, but it wasn't too far. Did we get a train? Doesn't matter.
Whereabouts is that in London? What part of London?
South. It's south. It's kind of just on the sort of. It's it's like further, quite south. It's South London, so you're almost out of London by that point.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So they would have for those Sex Pistols.
It's like a on the way there. So where we were in Deptford, so it's like a musical heritage on the way. So you've got Deptford where we were living. So it was where Squeeze were from, and Dire Straits started up. And then when you drive, you go through Lewisham, which had a big Odeon where David Bowie played,
right?
Ziggy Stardust and Boy George, saw him there, blah blah blah. And then you go through Catford, home of Japan.
Oh, okay.
Status Quo, and then you get through to Bromley, which of course is Siouxsie Sioux and Billy Idol were from. So
right.
But I knew somebody. I worked with a guy who went out with this guy who worked as a like a hair and makeup artist who apparently knew Siouxsie.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy said, "Oh yeah, I've been out. We went out for a night." He said, "It's quite funny." He said, "All the men are scared of her. When nobody comes up, and everybody's too scared to come up to her because she has this image."
Mm-hmm.
She said, this is she was moaning, and no men come up to her and talk to her because they're too scared to come up to her.
Mm-hmm. Well,
how true that is, I don't know. I don't know whether if he was telling me a tale or not. But why would he make up a story like that?
Oh no, I think it's totally believable. She's cultivated that image. So so she shows up in Thurston Moore's new book, Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth. He wrote his memoir, Sonic Life, which I loved. But yeah, she shows up, and it's in the 90s, mid 90s. And actually they were meeting with the Grateful Dead. Sonic Youth is Grateful Dead Sonic Youth Summit. And he said all of a sudden she kind of shows up. It's kind of like this sort of hippie-ish sort of milieu. And she's all in black leather. And it's like, why are you talking to these dead people? She sounds like she's been a drinking and just sort of curled up next to Thurston. And Kim's there sort of like, okay, what's going on? And it's kind of a funny story, but she went there to sort of like, you know, sort of everyone back kind of went up. So it's kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen her since. Now she toured last year. I saw some clips of some of the shows. They seemed a bit rough.
Yeah. I mean, well, she's getting on a bit now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, at least I was hoping that she'd do some more, but obviously it must have she probably thought, just need a few quid. I'll do some shows.
Well, that's it. She hadn't played live in a long time, certainly over here. And I really wanted to see the shows. And last year was impossible. I mean, I was like working, and I was working or in school all the time, broke. Like last year was just not a year for shows. This year's a much better year. So, and lots of shows this year. But I'd hoped to have gone. And, but unfortunately that didn't happen.
Oh, I just remembered. You know, I know you earlier on you were saying you're going to see The Damned.
Yes.
My niece's band called Problem Patterns, they're opening up for The Damned. Well, they're playing in Belfast because she's based in Belfast. That's where they're from.
Okay.
So they're at the beginning of this bill. So the Stiff Little Fingers headlining The Damned and Skids, and then her band.
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay.
yeah. So yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay. So that's over there, not over here.
No, that's in Belfast.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, I should look to see who's opening for The Damned. Is it the Danforth? Is it the Danforth? But looking forward to that one. My God, It's going to be neat. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's kind of
It's not one of them ones that I have tons and tons. Those are about all I could think of. I've never really been able to remember much more. It's not one of them ones that I remember tons of.
And it's and
I've not seen her live again, so it's not like where you can compare the two different two different gigs or 3 gigs, whatever.
Right.
So it's
and for me the first off, the number one thing that comes to my mind is when this gig is what happened after the show. But I remember her being in the cast and being in a bit of a snit. But I did enjoy the show. I remember they sounded good. The band sounded good. So do you still enjoy listening to Siouxsie and the Banshees?
Yeah. I haven't done for a bit, so I'll go back and revisit, I think. I haven't listened to them for a while. Yeah,
I do actually. Yeah, I do somewhat. I play them regularly. I had the Scream on not too long ago. I had Kaleidoscope on a compilation. So I do play. I still really enjoy that music. Now I find that after Hyena, like this episode's called City and Dust, and that came out the next year, and I love Cities and Dust. There's actually a band here in the city, Betamax, and they do sort of all 80s alternative. They're a lot of fun, and they actually just recently added Cities and Dust to their set. But I find that kind of after Hyena, there's quite a number of songs she did that I like, Siouxsie and the Banshees and some solo. But for me, it's kind of like after that, there's not really any of the albums kind of as a whole kind of knock me out. It's more just there's some good songs. It's more like the 78 to 84 period is my favorite.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably when they were probably at their height,
right,
creatively, and
and there's also
the best.
Yeah, and there's also the Creatures as well.
Creatures, yeah.
She did with Budgie. I love that. And I've still got it, that single of that Herbie Mann tune right now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually,
and
that I had.
They did. Was Peekaboo Siouxsie and the Banshees or the Creatures? Yes.
No, that was Siouxsie. I love that tune. That's a great later tune.
Is that Didn't they do it? Is that the theme from one of the Batman movies? Didn't they do a Batman movie theme?
They did, or their music's in one, because I know I've seen pictures of her at the premiere in London, but I haven't seen the movies, so I don't know. Not sure.
I think it was in one of the second one, second Tim Burton film.
Yeah, it is featured in one of them. I don't know the song because I hadn't seen the movies. Do you watch Stranger Things, that series?
Yes.
Because the last season, season 4, which was my favorite, the last song played at the end of the season was Spellbound by Siouxsie and the Banshees. Those opening guitar notes came on. I went, yes.
So I'll have to rewatch it. I have watched them, but I don't remember that being in it. But
yeah, it was the last episode of the last season, kind of at the end, the closing theme. They used Spellbound, Siouxsie and the Banshees. So that was kind of neat. All right. Well, thanks again, Phil.
You can't see me,
hang on one sec. Here it is. Cublet just brought it to me. It was Batman Returns, and the song is Face to Face.
Right.
Thank you, Cublet.
That makes sense because I think they had. Oh no, that was another one. No, I can forget that. Go on.
No, that was it. That was just it. It was Face to Face. So anyway, there we go. So thanks, and thanks for your memories of the evening. And you had a much nicer one than we had. So
yeah. I mean, I didn't nearly get killed in a car, but
that's always a plus. That's always a good thing. Yeah, I'd say so.
I don't think. Yeah, I think the company that I was with, I wasn't really that enamored with. So, and again, if you're listening to people who were there, I'm sorry, but that's how I felt at the time.
If you went with Phil to see Siouxsie and the Banshees at the International Center on July 10th, 1984, please get in contact with the blog so that we can say howdy do and that sort of thing. Okay. So thanks again. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
We'll talk to you then. Great.
Aha, I realized I made a mistake during that interview as Phil read out that Switch was one of the songs that was played. So that's from the Scream. So they did do one, possibly two, from that first album. Lady Luck did decide to stop throwing lawn darts at us, and we had that safe ride home. Now, we grabbed a copy of the Toronto Star before we left. It may have even been complimentary at the hotel. And this is the review for the show that appeared in the morning paper the next day. Siouxsie's Punk Passion Hypnotizes 3,000 Kids by Greg Quill, special to the Star. The scene in the parking lot of the Toronto International Centre, way out there in Malton, beyond Old Pearson Airport, was like something from one of those post-apocalypse sci-fi horror movies. Kids in tattered clothes with half-shaved heads and blank drained faces shuffled in a sad line toward entrance M for mutants. No smiles, no talk, but their eyes showed something, a glimmer of something. Fear? Suspense? Not quite. Last night's concert by Siouxsie and the Banshees, Britain's enduring purveyors of that odd blend of punk passion and eerie psychedelia, was cause for celebration among Toronto's new wave chic. 3,000 of them trekked out to Malton, probably farther than most of them have ever been from their Bloor Street subway, their habitual weekend gathering place, for a taste of what the band's record company calls music that stalks your senses, drawing closer with each listen till it pounces into the vortex of your soul for the oral kill. Sheesh, that's worth lining up for. Attracting 3,000 kids to the International Center is a feat in itself. Only a band with a heavy cult clout could have accomplished it. And Siouxsie Sioux, real name Sue Dalian, and her motley crew, more or less, permanent drummer Budgie, bassist Steve Severin, and ringer guitarist John Carruthers, who replaced an apparently quote-unquote nervously exhausted Robert Smith for this 8-date North American tour. They have cult clout to spare. They drew 40,000 people to one show in Stockholm recently, and Siouxsie was voted Britain's top female vocalist for 2 consecutive years by readers of the New Musical Express, or NME as we all called it. I doubt they'll ever win mass approbation here. Siouxsie, made up like some ancient Egyptian lady of the night, is an ungenerous performer. Her one trick is a hair-raising shriek that's neither tuneful nor well used. And Severin and Carruthers, decked out in black and looking bored beyond belief, were equally unimpressive. Songs from the new Hyena LP were for the most part depressing minor chord chants intoned over much sincere, if meaningless, instrumental thrashing. The band claims it's into an Eastern mystic phase at the moment, which may explain Carruthers' fascination with sound processing gizmos. His guitar sounded as if it was being phased through a black hole. Not at all a pleasant noise, or not a pleasant noise at all. So, oh my. You know, I like the Star. I still read the Star all the time. And honestly, I feel the Star often got things right, or at least were reasonable. But, you know, the whole, you know, tone of this was so typical of attitudes aimed at the alternative community, you know, in all its form, you know, because it wasn't, you know, Huey Lewis and the News or whatever. And because post-punk and the other types of fringier rock bands from that alterna world had only had limited to poor commercial success on this side of the pond, you know, that whole smirkmobile attitude, you know, in the commercial and conservative mainstream press was prevalent and common. Although the Star wasn't. It's a liberal paper, but again, it's a lot of the entertainment writers, not all, but a lot in North America, there were so many steps behind what was happening in Britain. And like for those into all this, you know, incredible innovation, we didn't care. And also too, you know, you got to remember, you know, people, you know, ooh and ah, oh, this was such an innovative band. Again, at the time, a lot of people felt negatively about them. So anyway, so this was my first and last time seeing Siouxsie. And even if not a perfect show, you know, I was saying I enjoyed it and I liked hearing the tunes. Now she's returned to playing live as we were talking. So hopefully I may be able to see her again. Well, that wraps up this look at Siouxsie and the Banshees at the International Center in 1984 and all the hijinks and buffoonery involved. Now, coming up next, I posted something online on Facebook the other week. I'm going to put it up on the site too, that I've realized that given how long it takes to create these episodes now, especially now that I'm writing them as well, and the blog entries, and given my age and given the number of shows, and then given, you know, I have a pretty thriving career at the moment. And so I'm just really busy. I'm not going to finish this project. There's like a couple of 100 shows to go. And there's so many that I want to talk about, especially further down the line. I mean, in Ottawa, I saw everyone. So, what I've done is I've restructured my whole schedule, and now I'm mostly, more often than not, going to be doing like looking at an artist if I've seen several shows and looking at all the shows. Plus, I've already planned on some compilation episodes. They're going to be there's going to be more artists. There's going to be a few more of those. So I've compacted about 180 down to about 70. So for the next EP, I'm actually sort of contradicting, wanting to move ahead, because I'm doing one. I'm going to be looking at some of my favorite shows that happen here in London, as well as shows that happen here in London that I missed. A lot of older shows from the 60s and 70s, shows I'd like to have seen. But then after that, I'm going to be jumping into 2 Smiths shows, which initially were supposed to be separate episodes, but I'm making them one. A show at Canada's Wonderland in 1985, and then one right here in Centennial Hall in London in 1986, and another. It's a free press review. I'm going to read it. It's like, what a joke. The cool thing about that Smith show is Phil had moved to England, which I know made him happy, but I miss seeing him. And we would write each other letters. This is the 80s. And I wrote one, and I have all these details about the Smiths show, the second one, and I forgot to send it. So it's a completely detailed review of the concert. As for the one in 85, a bunch of us went down. Phil will be back for that one. My friend WBN Riggs, Bonnie, she's cool with that name, she will be joining us, and maybe one other person we'll see. So we're going to have a few people on board for that gig. And then after that is going to be the first of my compilation episodes. It's called Separates, Roundup, looking at shows from 83 to 85, and shows by 999 and Modern English at Fry's, the Gun Club at Mingles in 1984, and Jeffrey Lee Pierce at Bullwinkle's, Bruce Coburn at Alumni Hall, Tears for Fears at Alumni Hall, and Jane Siberry at Alt House, Blue Peter and Messenger at Victoria Park Bandshell, and also that British lady from the Pig and Whistle trilling Streets of London at the British Pavilion during Cavalcade. I'll be explaining. But anyway, those live shows will all be coming up. So there's a few more coming up down the line than that one with Johnny Thunders, Sylvain, and the Reconstructed Dolls. Also, remember, I have the 2 Spotify playlists, Time Span C90 and Cities in Dust, my fave tracks. I'd like to remind folks to please remember to like, follow, subscribe. There's a lot for you to do. I'm asking a lot, but hey, and hit the notification bell where applicable on our Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram pages. And please leave your memories of any of the gigs I'm writing about or podcasting about on the platform of your choice. And finally, if you've enjoyed the podcast, be sure to tell your Toonhead friends about the splendiferous and edifying experience that is mylifeinconcert.com. Tell your stoner Aunt Susan. Tell your armchair critic author Arthur. Tell your concert-going gallerist Georgina. Tell your t-shirt collecting talent acquisition manager Tina. Tell the music junkies in your life. Tell them all about the magic and wonder that is the mylifeinconcert.com podcast. I'd like to say a big thanks to listeners, both new and returning, for taking the time to tune in. This is your host, Various Artists, signing off, and we'll meet up at the next concert. See you then, and see you there. Bye for now.